Public presentation outlining the current review and update of Springfield Historic District guidelines, policies, and procedures. So who gets it? Sean, would that be you?
That would be me, unless Phil wants to say anything in advance, or Alvin.
Well, yeah, just to kind of give I think the commission, at least where I don't know if the public is, we started an RFP process.
Just get, I'll just introduce, give your name.
Oh, sorry, those roaming from the Springfield Planning Department. So we put out an RFP at the request of the Chief Development Officer to do a kind of review and assessment of the current regulations. You know, as everyone knows here, the regulations were drafted back in the late 70s, early 80s, most of them anyway. So what we're hoping to do is take a look at those regulations and see updates or improvements to the regulations and to the process of the commission. It's kind of the same process we did for the zoning ordinance back in 2006. The zoning ordinance hadn't been updated since 1971, so we did that as well. So this is kind of the first public meeting. We put out an RFP. Sean's company, Zone Co, was actually the only company that submitted, but we went through a process of reviewing his qualifications and the company's qualifications, and were selected, and members of the commission were part of that process as well. So Sean's been kind of reviewing the current regulations, also looking at other communities. Sean's been here. Actually, Sean is in, I believe it's Cincinnati, right, Sean?
Yes.
Yeah, so, but Sean was here. We met with him 2 or 3 months ago. Sean did do a tour of all the districts. So right now it's just kind of a review of that process of what he's gone through and some of the general findings that he's able to find. This process was the phase 2 of this process, to put this kind of together and come before the commission and present this. The next process, which is the phase 3 of this, will be the actual drafting of the proposed regulation changes. Those will all go out. Once those are completed, out to the general public. It'll also come back to the commission, and then ultimately at the end, the final draft will be created, and then assuming the commission votes to move forward, then there's a whole other process of now getting those into place. I believe a change to the ordinance is going to ultimately require city council approval, so there's still a process to go through. But again, the goal of this is to review the existing regulations and see if there's updates needed.
It suggests that there's certain updates needed. It's something that was written in the 70s.
Yeah,
Things have to be looked at and rearranged periodically because when the time was in to do something.
so Sean, I'll turn it over to you. Or sorry.
Okay, go ahead. We'll be a little less formal. I just want to make sure everybody's name's on the record. If you could just give your name for the record to Sean before you start.
You ready for me?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Sean Suter. I am a lead principal and founder of Zone Co, the consultant on this project. And good evening, everyone. Nice to meet you. I haven't met most of you in person yet. Springfield is not unfamiliar to me. I've been there more than once. In fact, I've been going for about 23 years. My in-laws live in Longmeadow, so I'll be up there actually for Thanksgiving this year. I spent a lot of time in the Pioneer Valley in Springfield, and have a pretty good familiarity with the area. Our firm has also done some pretty significant consulting for the city of Boston. So I do have some relationships with your region. I am based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. We do work nationally, and it's good to be able to take a critical look at your historic preservation guidelines, policies, and procedures, and see if I can't help provide some advice to you all on ways that we could make preservation even more effective and stronger in your really cool and historic cities. So I have a presentation that I can share if can can share my screen, which I think I can. Let's see here. There we go, and I'll put it in presentation mode, and if you can see that, I hope.
Yes.
All right, great. Okay. All right, so it's been great working with Phil and Alvin and the rest of the team on taking a look at your historic ordinance, preservation ordinance, your guidelines that exist, your policies and procedures. All of this obviously implements your goals and your vision for historic preservation in the city. So it's really important that you're taking a fresh look at this. I think your ordinance was probably adopted about the same year I was born. So it's time to take a fresh look at it, and you're doing the right thing. We work around the country, like I said, and and have studied pretty significantly historic preservation best practices. And so we've looked not only at Massachusetts, but also are bringing some concepts from our work nationally. Benchmarking your ordinance against other effective ordinances. I've also litigated a number of historic preservation matters on the side of preservation. So I've been in the trenches and battled those issues. I've worked in numerous ordinances as well as guidelines. So I have a pretty good understanding of the lay of the land practically and how these things affect the actual buildings on the ground. But you have some great historic stock there in Springfield. One of the great things about Springfield that I note is that it's people are using the buildings there. It's where population has been lost over time, it's been backfilled with people. So that's great for preservation, keep those buildings active. And we're looking to promote the best preservation outcomes through a clear, consistent, user-friendly, and defensible ordinance. I think that would serve everybody well. You probably know all this stuff, 24 historic districts, 10 of those are multi-building districts, 14 are single building districts. The conditions vary from poor to very, very good. And I think a lot of it has to do with economics in your city and where buildings, where there's money being poured into these buildings, they look better than obviously where there's not. Maintenance and repair challenges abound. You have a lot of very old buildings and a lot of materials that need a lot of maintenance, like wood cladding, trim. That's not the purpose of this. There's just some observations that I made as I went. Obviously, in a city with aging buildings, a lot of historic buildings, it's important that there are resources and people and stewards to maintain them. We all know that. But relative to the ordinance, we reviewed chapter 49. That's your historic district guidelines chapter. We reviewed ordinances in the other 10 cities in Massachusetts that have 100,000 or more people. Tend to be pretty a lot of various districts and things. And then we reviewed the National Trust best practice and models. You can learn a lot from their resources as well. Our findings generally are laid out in the report that you probably have seen or read in more detail. I'll just kind of hit the highlights and then look forward to your questions and comments. I note scattered regulations and policies. You have to remember I'm coming at this cold, so never looked at your ordinances before, although I have some familiarity with the city. I never looked at your ordinances. And it took me a little while to find all the different pieces, right? So there are policies here, there are regulations here, demolitions in one chapter, the Historic Commission and all the things it does is in a different chapter. You do have a very nice website that kind of brings it all together, which is helpful. But there are generally they're scattered throughout various places. So it'd be nice if everything was consolidated in one place. You're missing some basic elements of a preservation ordinance. The key one is, how does a building become a historically significant building, right? So what is the criteria? How do we determine that? And it's not really apparent from your ordinance. Missing some best-in-class elements. There are some cities that there's a continuum, right? I mean, there's a continuum from, hey, let's put some ordinances in place that allow for creating districts and do the bare minimum of preserving buildings. And some cities go all the way to the other side, which is demolition by neglect ordinances and other more specific standards, very specific guidelines all the way down to paint color. So that there are two different ends of that spectrum. There are some things in those best-in-class ordinances that are cities with a significant historic inventory like Springfield have that you don't have necessarily. I'm not saying all of it is necessary or appropriate for Springfield, just throwing those things out there for you to consider. And so really it's all about the effectiveness and the defensibility of your preservation laws. I don't know if you've had a lot of preservation battles around demolition in Springfield, but I've been involved in a number. And it takes a lot of time, resources, and can really fire up the community. So we want to avoid those kinds of battles if we can through really good, clear laws and regulations. Specifically, your commission itself, I know you have a set of rules that I think have been drafted. They've not been adopted. That is required by your code to adopt those. So it's a specific finding. I think that's important for people coming to the commission. They know the rules of the commission. Criteria for determining certificates of appropriateness, certificates of non-applicability, and certificates of hardship really should be spelled out very clearly in the ordinance so that, I, as an applicant, come in, I know exactly what my burden of proof is, what I need to show, and you all know exactly what you need to consider in order to grant one of those certificates or deny them, and to do so in a legally defensible manner. Criteria for determining whether a structure is of historic significance. Again, we'll talk more about this, and there's a lot we can do around this, but it should be tailored for Springfield. There are standards. The National Trust has standards. Other cities have adopted these standards, but we really need to custom tailor these for your situation. And then penalties and appeal procedures should be laid out. I know they're in the code, but they should be laid out, I think, more clearly. The components of a model ordinance, typically you'll have a statement of purpose, an intent. What is the vision for preservation in Springfield? That should come through in the preamble of the ordinance. So it's very clear what we're trying to achieve. Defined terms. Definitions are really important because if you don't have defined terms, especially around your preservation terms, then you go to the dictionary, ordinary dictionary definition, and that can be, somewhat ambiguous or vague. So we want to make sure that there are very clear definitions in your ordinance of the various preservation terms. The next thing is creation of a preservation commission. You have that. The powers and the duties of the commission, that's pretty clearly laid out in your ordinance. Criteria for designating historic properties, whether that's districts, which you use, or districts and landmarks, or sites, or there's all kinds of different categories, but some criteria, so it's very clear what would make my property historically significant. Procedures for designation. What do I need to bring in? How do I get that designated? Who decides whether my property should be designated as a district? Procedures and standards for reviewing alterations and demolitions. What if I want to add a modern glass box to the back of my, early mid-1800s building? Can I do that? Is that appropriate? What materials can I use? What is the architecture that I'm allowed to use? All kinds of different things. Also standards around demolitions. When can I demolish a building? When can I not? You do have some demolition provisions in there, but that's going to be more and more important as we go. How and when to determine economic hardship? What are the standards for that? How do we determine it? What do you have to bring, applicant, in order to show us that you're going to suffer economic hardship? It's pretty easy to show, sadly, economic hardship when you're dealing with an old building that requires a lot of maintenance. So, what is there going to be that credible evidence that the city is going to require in order for me to come in and say, I want to tear down this historic building, and for you to say yay or nay on that? And then penalties and appeal process, which you have as well. Criteria for designating historic properties. Springfield should come up with its own. but you can adopt the National Register criteria, a combination of those. As you know, there are a number of criterion for determining historic significance and whether to designate a property. Not all criteria need to be met. Some may not apply. In your city, a lot of what you've designated, based on my observation, has to do with the historic character of the city, right? Different periods of time in the development of the city, or maybe it was an architectural style, or maybe it was an architect in particular. And then there are a few sites, Armory, et cetera, that are significant historic sites in the history of the United States and in the city of Springfield. So, there's some of that, but a lot of it's going to fall into this criterion C and D, which has to do more about distinctive architectural or construction characteristics, or the work of some particular, master carpenter or architect in your community. And then D, there's going to be in Springfield, because of its history, its long history, a lot of, buildings that are important to the history or prehistory of the city or in the United States. So you're going to get a lot of that probably. There may be some, associated with a major event. You've got a few of those clearly. Significant person history, you're going to have some of those, but most of the buildings are probably going to fall into C or D. There are other criteria, age, and the integrity of the building, location, design, materials, workmanship, all that sort of thing. So just wrapping up here, some recommendations. Defining preservation terms for clarity and consistency and defensibility, I think, is an important thing. It's pretty easy to do once we determine what they are, to make sure that everything's defined very precisely. Adding criteria for determining historic significance. How do I know if my property is eligible for designation? Going ahead and adopting those commission rules of procedure, just for clarity on due process. I think it'd be great to combine all regulations into one ordinance, move chapter 418 into 49. Of course, all that's subject to whether that's possible to do, and you'd have to obviously talk with your law director about that. But combining things is a good goal if you can, for ease of use and administration. And reviewing, updating, creating guidelines for single building districts for certainty for property owners in the community alike. So a lot of your single building districts, and I understand there have been a lot of designations of single building districts in order to get tax credits or state incentives. And a lot of those do not have any guidelines around them. So if I come in to make an alteration, what are the guidelines for doing that? Whether it's materials or window types or design, massing, scale, the use of different design elements. What can I and I cannot do would be really good to know, even if I'm just trying to get it designated to get tax credits or whatnot. We still would recommend creating some guidelines around every time you do a designation. And then one of the things I think that, in a city substantial like Springfield, with a great historic inventory and really a superb history, hiring a dedicated preservation planner, whether that's a staff person, I know that can be hard in local government, to get an FTE approved for a new position, but either that or some sort of outside consultant in your area that could be dedicated to these issues. I think there are a lot of issues. Alvin and Phil do great, but they tell me, it would be great to have a dedicated staff person. And I think that your city's large enough and sophisticated enough in this arena that it makes a lot of sense. And in cities, many cities I work in of your size and stature would have a dedicated preservationist on staff. So that's my presentation. My question for you all, really, as you think through this, it's not always easy to amend an ordinance. A lot of people are going to say, what are you doing? Why? It's worked fine. What's the point? What are the unintended consequences? So there'll be a lot of concern around it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And so if you could just do one legislative or administrative change, to your preservation toolbox in Springfield, to promote preservation, what would that be? I think that that's a good question to keep in mind as you move forward, and maybe you can get more than one, but just think about that one thing that would really move the needle. That's all I have. Thank you. Try to unshare if I can.
You can share
There we go.
email that.
Yeah, we can get that out.
Point is, I just would like, the order on there was different than the order here. Let me get it, just see.
That's the thing.
That's the same thing.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody wants that.
Yes, anybody wants to go.
This isn't the presentation.
Is that the report?
Yeah.
There's a lot of similar levels there. There's more information.
Is it also a complete report somewhere? Did I hear him say that?
Well, this is kind of the draft report.
This is the draft.
Oh,
Yeah, we got
This is just step two.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know if you guys have specific questions to what Sean has talked about, and then ultimately, you certainly can open it up to the questions and any comments. Again, just to stress to everyone here, this is kind of a phase 2 of this for the first kind of presentation of what's been done so far. The next phase is they actually come up with a draft of the proposed regulations, which will again be submitted to the commission and to the general public for comments. Once that gets kind of weeded through, we'll hopefully have a final set, and then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, changes to the ordinance is going to trigger to the council.
I had a quick question for Sean, if that's all right.
Oh,
You had mentioned the statement of purpose. Did every district has its own kind of little blurb, like paragraph blurb? Is that something kind of is what you were looking for? Like, could it be a different? It can't be the same statement of purpose for every. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm looking. I'm mentioning one for the ordinance itself. That's what I'm thinking about. Like,
Okay.
yeah, what are the preservation goals of the city? And
Oh, gotcha. All right. Sorry. Thank you.
Sure.
Attorney Shuchuk, I had a question for you.
Yep.
Is there any issues around combining different sections of the ordinance? Like we have a chapter for historic districts, we have a chapter for demolition delay, and if we wanted to merge the two, is there an issue there?
I mean, I don't see an issue. I'll obviously check in with the boss, the solicitor, but I don't see an issue with it. It would obviously make it much easier and for everybody, but.
Thank you.
To you guys first. Questions from commissioners?
I guess the very first thing that comes to my mind is this the time appropriate to discuss if the ordinance can somehow require that the properties have something in writing in the registry of deeds on their deed and paperwork.
I'd suggest you might be a little early on that one, but don't forget it.
Well, I won't forget it, but it's been brought up many times
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
by the public.
yeah, I'm not, I'd have to have a discussion with that. I don't know the process of getting the register to do that. I know, well, Bob's probably got a little more experience than I do, but I know the plans are recorded at the registry, but I don't believe individual deeds have it noted. Again, I have no clue what that process would be to get
That's
that
a
done.
lot, that's a lot of department question, but he'll.
Well, yeah, I'm bringing it up because if we are rewriting our ordinance, then perhaps our ordinance can require that this information be part of the deed.
Right, and I don't disagree at all. The other reason I'm saying you're a little early is because this is the briefest of presentations overseeing the entire consolidation. I don't want to say rewrite because a lot of things that were said, we have the structure in there. We just have to decide if it's worded correctly and if we want to make it. That we adapt it because evidently it's never been adopted.
And the only point on yours, that may be a possibility for districts moving forward, but you can't go back and tell everybody else they now have to throw it on their deed.
Right.
So for all the existing districts, that's not, new regulations can't go back and say, now you've got to put it on your deed.
Yeah,
Moving forward,
Yeah, if there's a transfer of ownership, then it could work. But the reason why I bring it up is because I think I heard Sean say, do you have things that you think should be
Right.
discussed?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and that we can certainly take that down.
And that's a lot of ground to cover and, a lot of,
Can I make a comment there?
give me 1 second, please. Come to you next.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of that thought. And that-
Oh, sorry.
And it
Sorry.
went- it left me, so I can't go far though, because we're gonna be talking about the same thing for a while, but, just details are not what's gonna happen. Details are gonna what's make it right or wrong down the road. So whatever we have, we gotta make sure we address it when the time comes.
Well, yeah, and again, I think that the next phase of this is really where the details are.
Well, I just have one last question, or one question for Sean, maybe not the last one. Some of the things you suggested that we didn't have, either it was because they weren't adopted. I mean, some of them, we do have definitions we've been operating off of as long as I've been around.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had isolated some of those, insufficient or sufficient, or if you've gone that far into the paperwork that we are operating from.
I haven't gotten to that level of detail just yet. Just noting that a centralized area of a place for definitions where all the defined terms are located. And then there do appear to be some that are not defined. I'd have to look back and see which ones, but we'll take a actual real look at that and make sure that everything that's in there is defined and it's in one location.
The main reason for me asking is so I'm not redoing work you might have already, you can already suggest is okay.
Yeah. Everything.
We're not on report, what we don't feel is correct, it needs to be improved and updated, just, for the times, instead of something that looks like it's okay today. So, that's okay with me, can I open this up?
Yeah, I just
Name and
want-
address for the record, as usual.
Harry Seymour, 68 Washington Road. And I just wanted to make a footnote to Commissioner Nardi with regard to historic disclosure. And there's the deed that can be followed, but we are also working on getting it required at the realtor's level as a disclosure. When we get a little bit farther on that, and we'll do that in 2025, we can come back and ask for the commission's support on that.
Well, from the realtor's point of view, since that would be the seat I hold. That's already been held to be disclosure required by an owner of a property.
Yes,
Massachusetts law has a very interesting protection for realtors. We are not required to look for things to disclose. However, if we know it, if we know it's in a historic district or they tell us, then we are absolutely already required to disclose it. Question comes is if a seller either doesn't disclose it or the realtor doesn't know. We have found, my history has found, because we're in an office, or an office that's very history savvy, let's say. And we find that sometimes sellers don't want to tell you that they're in the historic district for this particular reason. So we've been fighting it for years. But the disclosure is already required by a seller and by the realtor if they know it, or they don't have to be told by the seller. If they know it's historic district, they have to disclose what they know. But that already exists.
But they don't, when we first bought our house on Mill Street, we did not know it was in a historic district.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying, but those laws already exist to cover it. I'm not sure what else you could say to make it any more than it already is,
well,
but,
to be continued.
you continue, absolutely. That's it, anything
Yeah,
else? Well, you have the floor, Harry, go ahead.
Well,
You have another one?
yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what happens to some of these things, but one is, what about people who don't come before the Springfield Historic Commission? I mean, it seems like one of the issues here is that you get the good people, who wanna do the right thing, who come here, and then everybody else just does what they want and nobody, unless somebody, flags them, it doesn't come to anybody's attention. I mean, that to me is an area in and of itself. And I think we need some penalties there.
Yeah.
And it needs to be strict enough that people will want to conform.
That very well could be something we can get while we do this, the law department can contribute what we can and we cannot do. You know, so that it's more, so that it exists at a level where we know what the penalty is legitimate, what the law department would think that they can do.
Yeah, and just.
I
to-
agree with you on that one.
And just to kind of, I think we do have a much better relationship with the building department than we used to have in years past. So I think with the GIS now that has the historic district listed again. Obviously, if someone does something without a permit, I ain't gonna catch it, but I think in the most cases we catch it, but obviously there have been mistakes made in the past. Where either.
But I also
Whether-
believe, Phil, that there are people that would rather do it, go out on that limb and do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, I
What are
agree.
you gonna do after, what are we gonna do after, but we got a clear path of something that could be done.
It
So
goes,
that should be in this process.
it goes under, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Promise I'm gonna get to, but I get a couple, go ahead.
All right, so I'm Bobby Carroll, 96 Elliott Street. I think all of you know me. I served on the Historical Commission for 11 and a half years. And during that term, I was one of the people that crafted the demolition delay ordinance, the municipal protocol, and the Colony Hills Local Historic District and 3 or 4 single building local historic districts. And I now chair the Community Preservation Committee. And Sean, if you're not familiar with it, it is somewhat of a unique program in Massachusetts where the voters of each city and town can opt into the program and actually raise their taxes a little to create a separate fund that stays local, that can help community housing, recreation and open space, and historic resources. And in each city and town that's adopted CPA, there is a committee that receives proposals and makes recommendations to the legislative body. We do not give out money, we recommend to the city council. And I'm happy to say that, you know, this past election was the 8th anniversary of CPA passing in Springfield. And CPA now raises something like $2.5 million a year that we would not have had if it were not for CPA. The concern I have is that the committee's policy is if we help a historic resource that's not already in a local historic district, we want to see that it's permanently protected. And the easiest way to do that is with a single building historic district. And when I look at the summary of September 16th, it implies that, gee, using chapter 40C is not normal, where here in Massachusetts, chapter not normal for creating a single building district, that there should be landmarks ordinance instead. Here in Massachusetts, chapter 40C, when it was established in the 1960s, said local historic district is a building or buildings on a parcel or parcels. So clearly, chapter 40C can be used for creating single building historic districts. And I've spoken to Jennifer Doherty, who's the Mass Historical Commission person who works with communities creating districts, and she said, oh, absolutely. Chapter 40C has everything you need to designate an individual building. So I guess I'm just concerned that the report of September 16 kind of implied that that was not the proper way to go. The other concern I have is the state law governing community preservation defines a historic resource. And it defines it as either something that's on the state register of historic places or has been found by the historical commission to be important to the city because of architecture, history, archaeology, or culture. And I think it's fine that we adopt standards as to what constitutes important, but I would not want to get into a situation where you say to us, oh, this applicant is indeed important because of da. And then when it comes time to create a local historic district to protect the property that we've given money to, you say, oh, well, it doesn't meet the standard for creating a historic district to protect it. I mean, we need equal standards for what's eligible to come before the Community Preservation Committee as a historic resource and what's eligible then to be a local historic district. But beyond those things, I think having guidelines as to what's historic and how you administer the districts once they're created is excellent. The committee is all volunteers, you know, as I know, we struggle with this, and to have more guidelines that will be a great tool for us. But, you know, we certainly on the Community Preservation Committee, in a sense, have been partners with you. We've created 4 or 5 local new historic districts because of CPA funding. The Springfield museums, which were exempt from the Quadrangle Mattoon Street Local District, 3 of them have had their exemptions removed, so they're now permanently protected. And we have 4 other historic buildings waiting. Once this embargo on the creation of new local historic districts, we've got 4 other districts waiting to move forward.
Thank you.
Erica Swallow, 64 Washington Road. I have 2 items that I suggest putting in the toolbox. One is to bring the municipal protocol into the ordinance. I don't know exactly what a protocol is, but you know, I know Bob drafted it, but it's not in any ordinance, and thus it's very difficult to find. It's a 2-page document that's in a scanned format that you can find somewhere if somebody sent it to you. But if Sean hasn't already seen it, I'd recommend him review it. It's a protocol which triggers any municipally owned or funded historic building to come before the Springfield Historical Commission before it be rehabbed or demolished, and it sort of triggers them to review it. I think having that in the ordinance will be a good idea because it's one of those scattered resources. So if it wasn't already on your list of scattered resources, I would put it in there. And then the other one is we focus a lot under the definitions. I don't think we have a definition of building actually. And that might sound silly to have, but we focus a lot on buildings in the ordinance as it is now, but we don't focus on structured objects or sites, of which we also have those. So I would recommend looking at the U.S. Department of Interior National Park Services standards for the treatment of historic properties and adopt the definitions for building, structure, object, and site, and use those in the ordinance. I think, for example, we recently had, just to give an example of something that wasn't protected and wasn't brought before you guys in the Historical Commission, was the Stern Square bench, which is a 137-year-old bench in a historic park. That was not brought before you all or the Parks Commission because there is no protection for that historic structure. So if we had, you know, a definition for structure, which would include benches, bridges, fences, gazebos, etc., we would have had protection for the public to comment on whether the city should basically demolish that bench and put it into storage. So those 2 items are bring municipal protocol into the ordinance and have definitions for building, structure, object, and site, and have those be protected.
Very much. Who's next? Nobody else? Go ahead.
You're at home, Springfield Preservation Trust, 74 Walnut Street. What I really liked from the report is the fact that it mentioned about hiring a preservation planner. That is definitely something the trust has been advocating for, and I know the city has been trying to fill that position too. So I do applaud everybody's efforts on it. But I think this really comes to light that this position is not, you know, just essentially a thing that is just for a time being. It needs to be something that can be forever now for this commission. I think it's just, we have so many different historic districts, so much historic history, and you need to have someone really dedicated to this full time. as much as possible. Again, I know within the city's budget, and you guys do a wonderful job, but I think there just needs to be an official paid employee all the time. And I want to also applaud everyone on this commission in front of me. Each of them do an amazing job. They really do.
Amen.
Here.
Okay, we got two people left out there. You gotta have something. Any questions for us? Sure, go right ahead. Name and address for the record.
Fred Lewis,
Yeah.
73 Washington Road.
Thank
The one thing that I would say is, and it relates to what Harry said earlier. I've been in front of you personally to have some work done. I know there are other places that don't. I've dealt with contractors here who will tell me they will do whatever I want. And those that will say, you know, we have to go before the historic commission. So you've got the players that play by the rules and those that don't. I guess my question would be for this, and since you're looking at all of these guidelines, and as Harry mentioned, you've got people who just go and do. Are there penalties for those contractors, or should there be penalties for those contractors that don't go through the process and permit work and don't do it? Because I believe that they know what they're dealing with. If they're a local contractor, they know the historic districts, and they're willing to skirt and do whatever they want to do.
I agree. You see that every week.
Almost
Every meeting.
And, Hope Lewis, 73 Washington Road, Washington
you.
Road's well represented.
Yes, it is well represented.
Yeah.
Always.
Just in some of my recent discussions, we moved here from out of state. In our particular little neighborhood in Cozy Corner, there have been several recently, lately, from out of state who have no idea of Massachusetts historical, provisions or anything like that. And I'm finding more and more as I talk to them, they do not know that they're in a historical district. Some of them don't even know what a historical district is. So I do think it's becoming a real issue, as more people, are moving in from out of state. That they have proper notification, early on in the process. I mean, we happen to know because we were looking for historical property. But a lot of them necessarily don't have that on their radar.
Absolutely. Any commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Kroll.
So I know, Sean, we had talked about this in the beginning when you came, so just as a reminder, I know that the board itself had broken into committee groups, this was probably about 2 years ago, 1.5 ago. And we had seen a lot of areas that could be improved. A lot of it you have, I know we're at the 50,000 square foot overview flybys. But we had kind of gotten in the weeds with, people that don't know anything about a historic district. What's a stick building? What's a Georgia Victoria? So we actually broke into committees with pictures and what does something look like? If you're thinking about doing changes, what should it look like? What's in a historic district? We got into policies and procedures that might be missing. Al spent a lot of time on the application from the building department. What else can we add to that so we don't have a missed piece or an unchecked box? So we kind of got in the weeds with policies and procedures, information. So when somebody looks something up, what do they find? What can we add for informational purposes? And when somebody really wants to understand that they're in a historic district, what are some of the different types? What do they look like? So we still have some of that material. I know maybe that's not for tonight's meeting, but I don't want us to lose sight that we had done the work and that all of that would really back up a lot of the stuff that we're trying to get to, especially on the front end, to educate people about what they've bought, or now they have to put a porch on, or they have to talk to a contractor and they haven't done that before. They can at least understand a little bit more before they come, or they make the phone call. Album's great, but for recall, Alvin there was probably 10 people that were intimidated and found somebody and got their need fixed, and they may or may not have gotten caught. So since we're talking about filling all the gaps and transparency and education, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that material was created, and I think it would help to be able to pull that in when you start getting down to, how do we actually put this forward and put it together?
And I think I think we have provided Sean with most of that. We'll double check.
I just wanted to make sure it was still around and
The final committee summaries and the final things that Teresa had. I'm not sure if any of us have a complete, I have some of it, but Teresa, I thought, had the last set before she was gone.
Yeah, and we'll, again, we've tried to provide Sean with everything we have, so.
Well, the reason I'm putting her name on it is because if we haven't talked to her, we might want to go. But she might have something that isn't.
We have a final draft of
Yeah,
all the stuff.
We're,
we have.
we're pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't a rewrite of this, but that,
Right.
a lot of that rewrite would be very valuable to what we're doing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Harry.
Harry Seaman, 68 Washington Road, and I'm intrigued by something that Sean said about historical periods and wondering how that might play in here. That there's, like a pre-colonial period, there are late 19th century periods, there's an early 20th century period. And I'm wondering how that might be at a larger level, something that we're trying to preserve, other than just the specific buildings.
Well, I interpreted that, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, that sounded like what we were having to consider if it qualified for either a district or it would qualify for a district. What's the criteria gonna be? As opposed to every single thing that is a 20th century thing, or, whatever historic thing might happen. Because if you just have a historic item, it's only gonna affect a small sliver of what might be historic properties. But if one property comes up and we know the president slept there, and we know that, George Washington stayed there when he was manufacturing guns in Springfield or something like that, all those things we have considered in the past. When talking about buildings that went up on State Street, I forget exactly what it was, but I could probably tell us the whole thing, but I remember there were significant things that had happened. And that helped to determine that that was a historic property with say, can't tell you the exact, but. So that's what I was interpreting when you said that, Sean, relative to period and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's right. Good summary.
Thank you. Anybody? Do it, bro.
I don't know. Okay, everybody's saying.
Commissioner Walter, bro. Yeah,
No, it's good. I
added some good stuff.
all the stuff
Well,
we're doing.
one thing I will say that bothers me, and Mr. Seymour touched upon this. What we face after someone purchased a home, made changes, sold the house, and then new people buy it, and there's half windows that were installed, or they put a different door, and you don't wanna be a commission that says, well, you can't do it, and you gotta take those windows out, but that's is that something that we can talk about making some type of something in the ordinance? I know one meeting we had, I can't remember if it was Erica who brought it up, but the contractor should be charged. It was somebody, and I do appreciate Washington Street comes out like, thankfully, y'all are here all the time, I appreciate it. But, some contractors, like you said, they know what they're doing. And, then we get people who are genuinely sincere. You did not have to come here. You could have just kept adding windows, So I wonder if there's something we can talk about in the future, Sean, that would kind of help reel that in to prevent that from happening.
I think we've all considered what legal options we have, how many times over the years that we find, I don't wanna say we find they're limited, but maybe that is something that could be more clearly defined, so
Yes.
that we know if they fall under it, then the legal department.
Yeah, that's certainly the discussion we can have as part of this. Again, I'm not 100% sure what the legalities are of charging a contractor versus, I don't
No,
know
it's
that.
not.
Yeah, so but that certainly can be part of it.
I know it's not part of our purview to be doing something. like that.
No.
Usually it's either an owner that has to go out with their own contractor. But I always had that feeling like, how, if a contractor knowingly violated this, how come there is no responsibility for them other than what a homeowner might be able to get? There may be no answer to that, but that's something worth talking about.
I mean, you got Attorney Shuchuk on, and you guys are here with the building department, because at one meeting, we had 3 different pieces, and I remember one being solar, they put a brand new roof up, they didn't pull a permit. But the homeowner had to come back because of some stop work order for
That's right.
the meter. And the poor lady had to sit here and say, I can't, they told me I had to come. So we had a solar company come do work, replace a roof, didn't pull a permit. We had another one with windows, there was a larger outfit. So it seems like there should be some kind of recourse if you're gonna look at that, whether it's heavy-handed or soft-handed or something, there should be some kind of process at least considered of what's legal and what could be done, so.
Mr. Rose has.
Go ahead.
I just want to comment on that, because I agree with you. I think that if you think about the contractor who does that the first time, if they receive some sort of warning, and then if it comes back, there could be a penalty, because there's gotta be some process out there, because you gotta stop the bad behavior. And that's really what it is. And you brought up, ma'am, the solar companies. I can't tell you how many people have knocked on our door wanting to put solar panels on my roof and tell me they can take care of it, it's not a problem. And it's like, you're wrong, it is a problem.
So you're an owner who's aware, so imagine all the owners who are
That's
like,
right.
oh, this is great, this is gonna save your life.
That's exactly right. And it's appealing, it's like, wow, this could be really great. But it's, again, people aren't aware, and we need to figure out how to make them aware.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight, go for it.
I think, there is a process. And anyone, any citizen, any homeowner can go online and file a complaint against any person with a contractor's license, architect license, engineer's license. Those complaints go to the licensing division, so when they go to review their license, even a realtor can file a complaint.
No, they can file one against us.
Yes.
Yeah, and when they go to renew their license, that will be taken under your account. It's done online.
You know, a lot of, these are the things that are kind of weedy for today's meeting, but we're making notes of everything. So that when we get back to a position where the question should be asked, we'll hopefully be remembering, right, to ask it in the sequence in
Yes.
which things are happening. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I wanna make another comment.
Please.
I have long thought that a lot of this is marketing. That, from the community standpoint, right? The atmosphere that we wanna create is, you can't do this without going through the historic commission, and that needs to be marketed. It needs to be told to people, it needs to be persuasive, right? And I also think that with regard to homeowners, especially new homeowners, we need to market the positive side of being in a historic district, and not just slap them with, 2 pages of you can't do this,
Right.
right? And we need to tell them, here are the 10 things that you benefit from by being in an historic district. And then also say, in order to maintain that, we have to have guidelines for people who want to change something in their house. But put it under the positives rather than, have it be the only thing that people see.
Anybody else?
One more thing on the notification, so if it's not already in the ordinance, it might be worth noting what the city does. I know there's a process of notification when a new homeowner moves in, but I think it's kind of informal almost. I don't know where it's written, it's definitely not in an ordinance, but I think it is worth noting, potentially, if you're reworking this, how are new homeowners how and how often are homeowners in historic districts notified?
Well, I don't kind of answer the question, we don't. I would defer my volunteer.
Well, Bob assists us with.
Well, Bob,
Yeah,
but-
right.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know when properties are sold unless you sit down and go through what Bob used to do, the deeds.
Yeah.
So it's not, we don't get a notification of, hey, 63 or 64 Washington Road just sold. So I think we're just as much as a disadvantage unless we sit down, which again, can be done, but that adds to staff time and staff work. So it comes down to managing how we do it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't believe I know we used to, because Bob used to come in and do it.
So let me just clarify on that. I worked in the city planning department for 30 years. And when I took early retirement, I then volunteered in the planning department for 13 years. And I came up once a week, and one of the things I did is I would look at all of the Realtor.com new listings and identify what's in the local historic district, because I'm an idiot savant. I can look at it and say district, 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 and I would print it out and give it to Alvin, who would then send a congratulations letter to the Realtor. Congratulations on your listing. Please disclose that it's in the McKnight Local Historic District. Here are the guidelines. And I would do the same thing for property sales. And Alvin would send out the letter that said, congratulations on your new house in the Forest Park Heights Historic District. Here are the guidelines. So it takes time, but it certainly, if you can't get it on the deed, if for some reason the state law that governs the registry of deeds, this is the next best solution. And it's not that time consuming.
Was it return receipt so you could prove the realtor knew it?
I don't think we did that.
Just a nice letter.
The only other thing you can look at, and I know the city isn't really big on software and cutting edge, but that's database. So if you had a database like GIS and all those things are in there, what district it's in, what street it's in, well, it says right in there if it's in a historic district. So if you had a database software and there was a change of hands, it sold, got bought, that would generate, hey, we got 15 properties this week. Here's what was sold. These are in the historic district. That's just software. That's just notification. I don't know, what the city's added any of that, whether that started something or not. I mean, we got AI now. It's gonna save all of us. So we can have an AI bot go and look at all the sales and then send something out, right?
Yeah,
We're spoiled too. We have Jim Boo that does what you do. He probably learned it from Bob, but that's what Jim does. In McKnight. But barring that, if you had a database notification, it wouldn't take anybody's time, right? It would pop up and you get a notification of what the addresses are, but.
I had no clue about that.
Well, I mean, if it's something the city's working on, or they're already having some kind of database piece, this would be one product that you could use.
Well, we've identified many problem areas here today, from notification to disclosure to historic periods. And we can read through this, but you already heard it all before. And even hire a plan, which is that's the last thing that you're gonna have to worry about. But if we can get a new set that can be adopted, new policies and procedures and definitions that can be adopted, then it's gonna be a lot easier to implement it without wondering exactly. We're going back in the book, saying, which we do periodically when we're here, we read hardship or whatever the standards like that we have in existence, but whether they were adopted in an appropriate manner or not, is we have to just look at that and see if they need to be altered in any way before they can be adopted in an appropriate.
That's what John's doing.
Yeah, that's what Sean's doing, yeah. Any other issues for tonight? Okay, Sean, any summary for us?
No, everything you all are talking about is right on. I think I look forward to getting into the details with you. And like a lot of things when it comes to legislation, there are not a ton of right or wrong answers. It's just what works best for you all. So look forward to working with you on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us tonight. Last calls, if not, I entertain adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Yes.
All right. Very adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming.